We are Heather and Paul Christie.
And for over 12 years, we've worked with executives and entrepreneurs to accelerate change in every aspect of their business.
Because we are in the fastest paced business environment that anyone has ever seen before.
So join us for the Evolve to Win show. Hi, and welcome to another Evolve to Win show with Heather and Paul.
How are you doing today?
Well, and so we have put together a 7-part series about the hidden motivators, the 6 hidden motivators. And so today we are going to be talking about one of them. But Heather, can you just sum up just what we're talking about in general when I say hidden motivators?
Yes, I'd be happy to. You're so serious today. All right. So we are talking about hidden motivators. These are what drive us to take action. So another way to think about what motivates you, it's your why behind everything that you do. And what we've learned is that unless you actually really understand the distinction between all these different motivators, you're probably not in touch with the makeup of your motivators and what really drives you to take action. So we're talking about why you do what you do. And today the focus is on knowledge. So one of our hidden motivators is so it's how we value knowledge, how we value learning and discovery.
Right.
So the way that we're going to do this is Paul and I are going to do kind of a little bit of a role play where he's going to play the part of somebody who's on one end of the knowledge spectrum. We'll call that intellectual.
Yep.
Yeah. And I'm going to play the part of somebody who's on the other end of the knowledge spectrum, and we're going to call that instinctive. So you're going to play the
intellectual,
and I'm going to play the instinctive. Now, as we're playing these parts, I want you to know that we are going to really emphasize the extremes on that spectrum. So it's not really who Paul and I are, but I think it's the best way to really show you what the distinction is and how you value knowledge. So we all value knowledge in a little bit of a different way.
Right.
There are some people like Paul's end of the spectrum who really value the discovery of knowledge, the acquisition of knowledge, the learning, the taking the time to dive in deep, right?
Yeah. So I totally, and actually I am in real life, I am fairly high intellectual, meaning that I like data. I like to discover. I like to watch documentaries. I like to learn for the sake of learning. I like just the feeling I get when I'm learning something. And then I know that maybe somewhere down the line, I'll be able to use it. And I don't mind taking the time and investing the time to learn about things that, I mean, I'm still watching, and I'm just finishing up somewhat of a documentary that's on Amazon Prime. It's called John.
Always watching a documentary.
Yeah, and it's John Adams, and John Adams is a series. It's a 7-part series, and so I'm watching that right now, and it's very historical, and it just has so many good stuff, and the acting's really good in it as well. But the reason I like watching it is because I'm learning something as well. Like I actually get excited when it comes on, because even more than most Netflix or Amazon Prime kind of series that are out there that you just watch for entertainment, this one I love because I'm actually learning something as well.
Yeah. Okay. So this is a perfect example. If you can relate to Paul and you are one of those people who will dive into a documentary or even a documentary series because you really value learning, then you're likely to be more on the intellectual side of the spectrum. Whereas somebody who's on the instinctive side of the spectrum, and I'm just going to give you a real life example. I do lean a little bit instinctive, but not as extreme as I'm going to share, okay? Someone who's on the instinctive side of the spectrum, when they hear Paul say, hey, I just downloaded a series on Netflix, and he was traveling over the weekend. So he said, in case you want to watch it. And I said, okay, great. What series? Mm-hmm. And he said, it's a documentary, 7-part series on John Adams. I said, okay, thanks. I think I'll skip it. Right? Give me the bullet points. Like, give me the highlights. I did, when I was younger, a report on John Adams. And I'm like, I think I'm all set on learning about that, as entertaining as that may be. So for someone who's instinctive, the thought of watching a documentary is kind of like, don't really want to do it. Unless, of course, it's something that you really want to know about. So people who are instinctive, the other side of the spectrum, are really specific about what they want to learn. And it's always for a purpose. And rather than going deep and watching multiple series of videos or getting lots of information, the instinctive person values the application of knowledge. So I want you to think about how different that is.
Mm-hmm.
Intellectual values the gathering of knowledge.
That's right.
Instinctive
for
values,
the hopes of using it for some time,
yeah,
at some time or another, right?
Literally, and it's a hope.
Yeah.
And sometimes it will never get used,
right?
Because there's never enough knowledge gathered to actually take action.
Well, there's so much you really can't share that much. Right?
Yeah. So while the intellectual is studying, researching, watching, reading, listening, doing all of that research, the instinctive is busy doing, right? Because we value the application of knowledge. Now, mind you, we may not even have a whole lot of knowledge to apply, like in terms of research and data, but sometimes just a little bit is enough. Like, let's get going and let's see how it works. Okay. So I want to give some real life examples about how these two ends of the spectrum would do things differently, right? So the way that we're motivated to take action has to do with what shows up in the real world. So let's just take a meeting. Let's say that we've got a business meeting as an example. And let's say that we had an agenda that was put out prior to the meeting so that we knew what was going to be discussed. Would you do anything to prepare for that meeting?
Totally.
And what kinds of things would you do?
So whatever was the agenda already put together
at
that point?
Put together and
so then I would look at my part and gather whatever information I needed, data, whatever, to be able to bring to the meeting to support my opinion or that part of the agenda.
Okay, Perfect. So that's what the intellectual does, spends time in preparation, and you might even go and gather data that brought you down another path to gather additional data that supported the data. Right. So you actually can get deeper into knowledge. Whereas the instinctive is probably going to check that agenda before the meeting, maybe not, because the way that the instinctive person works is they base their opinions, their knowledge on past experience usually.
Mm-hmm.
So I might take a look at the agenda before the meeting, and if I do, it's probably going to be just in time, right? Because instinctives like to do a lot of just in time.
Right.
Take a look at the agenda, see what's on it. Where's my part? Oh, this. Yeah, I know something about this. And then I might think on the way into the meeting what I might like to share.
Yeah. And
the instinctive is going to share information that's not research based. It's not based in data and science and, like facts and figures. The instinctive is going to share what they know and what they understand based on their past experience, their real life experience. So another way to say this is the intellectual side of the spectrum tends to be book smart, right? Everything's based in research and facts and data.
Right.
Whereas the instinctive side tends to be more of what you would call street smart, right? Based on being out there and taking action. Here's what I know because I'm out here in the field and here's what I see.
Yeah. And so if you're listening to this and you're like, well, am I more intellectual or am I more instinctive? One of the quick ways to find out is if you are gathering information or somebody gives you a topic, do you just Google it and find out like the very first
page one
on it?
One.
Yeah, exactly. Like just the very least amount of information just to give you enough to get going.
Mm-hmm.
Or do you like dig in, go to the Wikipedia page, start reading more about it. Then next thing you know, you're onto another hyperlink and you're into another one and you're going down this rabbit hole and you just have, but the information is good.
Yeah.
It's really good.
It's great information.
And you're like, you can't wait to share this with somebody.
Mm-hmm.
But where does the conflict come in?
All right. So let's talk about that. You just said something that made me think about where a natural conflict comes in. The intellectual is diving in deeper, and gathering all this information because they have this thirst for knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And they want to share that knowledge because unless you know better, you think that other people need as much information as you do. So on the intellectual side of the spectrum, how much do you want to share? How much information do you think people want to receive?
Well, I think I want them to receive as much as they've taken in, as much as they'll allow me to.
So let's just say too much.
Yeah.
Right.
And well, I don't consider it too much.
You don't.
But for somebody who's instinctive, that's too much information.
Right.
And so I know that I have to limit the amount of information that I can give certain people. And so just understanding that somebody else who's highly intellectual, meaning just they like the information as well, is going to require that to be able to make decisions. Whereas someone that's instinctive, the person that you're playing right now, only needs a small bit of information to be able to make a decision on.
So when you think about where this can be a conflict, imagine the person in your office or multiple people who are responsible for training others in any different area. If you, like, there are a lot of people who are actually right in the middle here. Sometimes they're intellectual, sometimes they're instinctive. And you know, that's kind of where I fall. Sometimes I'll dive in deep, and other times I'm surface level, first Google search, that's it, right? Most people fall somewhere in the middle, and yet we have people on the far end of the spectrum, like Paul's playing and I'm playing. So if you have a trainer who's highly intellectual, they're going to give more information than anyone can consume, right? The people in the middle can't take as much information as somebody high in the intellectual spectrum wants to give. But they don't know that, right? Because whatever motivates us, we make the mistake quite often of thinking that that's the same thing that motivates others, right? So someone on the highly intellectual side of the spectrum might give too much information. On the other hand, someone who's highly instinctive is probably not going to give near enough information because they don't need a whole bunch of information. They like bullet points. They like high level, big picture, summarize it for me. What's more important is we get into action. We figure it out for ourselves. Let's go get the result. So the highly instinctive is also not going to be great at serving the masses, right? Because they probably won't give enough. So
here are some of the issues as well, too. And this is where in office, you know, if you work in an office, you run into this all the time. And as we go through these motivators, all 6 of them, and we're starting off with the first one, which is knowledge. And on the one side, you have intellectual, which one is that I'm playing, the data gatherer, get as much information in. And then Heather's playing the instinctive side. We all have either one of these or maybe both of them, depending on what levels. But where the issue comes in is that I feel like because I've gathered all of this information and I have all this data, that there's so much value to that to me. I really feel like that's so valuable. Like, how could anybody ever not make a decision or make a decision on not having all of the information? Yeah. So that's how I feel. And
so how might you judge me if I'm instinctive?
And so then I see you be able to make a quick decision without reviewing any data, maybe just a little bit that I have given you. And you look at it and you kind of push the data away and you're like, oh, we're just going to do this. And to me, I say, if I don't know that this is actually going on, the type of style that you are, what motivates you, I can be offended by it and I can start judging you based on that. I can say, well, maybe she's definitely not as interested in data, and maybe she doesn't care about it, and maybe she is maybe not smart, maybe she's, you know, there's a lot of judgment that comes along when you're heavily intellectual and you need all that information. And so people who are highly intellectual have to be careful of being too judgy to other people, because other people have amazing value in being instinctive, because you're really more going off of your street smarts and past experiences, and shouldn't be discounted at all.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're right. It's very easy for the intellectual to discount the instinctive for all those reasons. And you know what? You may make the mistake of thinking the instinctive person is lazy because they won't go do all the research.
Right.
Meanwhile, the instinctive person is so busy doing whatever this thing is, trying to get the result. They might look at the intellectual as, you're just spinning wheels. You just keep researching and looking at the numbers and looking at the data, but you never take action. So you can see that very natural conflict. Now, imagine that you've got the intellectual in a management position. And quite honestly, this happens quite a bit, right? You've got the person who's highly reliant on resources and data and information. So they're in the management position. And let's say the instinctive comes to a meeting and says, hey, I really think we ought to do this on this project. This is the way we should go.
Okay.
Your response is going to be what?
Where's the data to prove it?
My response is, what data? I don't have data. I didn't research this. I know this is what we should do because I'm talking with the client constantly. We should try this.
And I walk away going, I can't believe that she would make a decision based on the little bit of information that she's taken in. We have to research this way more to be able to make a decision.
And then the decision may or may not ever happen, but very easily gets dismissed by the intellectual when the instinctive doesn't have data to support it. So in that scenario, what can I do? If I know I'm the type of person who always gets turned down because I don't have the backup data, get a little bit of data, right? So know this about yourself. Know this. If you've got a boss who's always asking, where's the research? Where are the numbers? Where are the facts? Just take a couple more minutes and come up with some data, some facts, or at least some really strong argument that backs up your position, right? So that's a great way to do it. Let's pretend the instinctive is in the managerial position. And instead of, the reverse happens where the intellectual comes in and has a pile of information, numbers, data, facts, figures, and says, I think we ought to do this, and then hands all of the data to the instinctive. What's the instinctive going to do? Can you summarize this for me? Because the instinctive is not going to pour into all that information. And by the way, if the intellectual sends the instinctive an email with paragraphs and lots of information and lots of data and lots of really pretty PowerPoints with lots of words on them, the instinctive has just gone, that's too much. So what can you do in that situation to be more effective as an intellectual?
Well, first of all, it's just being aware of who I'm dealing with. So understanding, and a lot of times you can't tell because people aren't as
they're hidden motivators.
Yeah, they're hidden, but they're not at the extremes generally. Although you have certain careers that are highly intellectual. A lot of architects are highly intellectual. A lot of accountants, a lot of engineers are highly intellectual. And you have a team of people that are all highly intellectual, but maybe the person who's leading the team is instinctive. And so, yes, the jobs require all of this, highly data-driven information, especially in the day and age of analytics now, and even in marketing, it's so much more highly analytical now to have those highly intellectual people. But usually the person who's making decisions, the driver of the business, generally more instinctive because they need to make decisions quickly. The real challenge, and I think just to get back to just one challenge that intellectuals do have, is that they can sometimes have the analysis paralysis.
Definitely.
Can just keep researching and never, ever take action.
And one challenge that the instinctive could have is that they don't slow down long enough to gather enough data before making decisions so they could make a bad decision that ends up costing them more time and effort and energy.
Right.
So that's kind of the two spectrums. Now, Al Monagrado just made a comment that one of the unfair judgments that the intellectual might make is that someone who doesn't want all the information is intellectually lazy. And Al, you're totally right on that because, the instinctive is not really ever going to want all the information. Like they might dive deep into some things, right? Because it's very specific to what they want, but they're probably not going to want all the information. It does not make them intellectually lazy. And quite frankly, does not make them any less smart than the intellectual. And that's something really, really valuable to know. Is it doesn't matter how many degrees you carry and how much you've researched and how much you've studied. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're smarter than the instinctive, right? Because the instinctive can be incredibly smart, incredibly effective without having poured into those books. And think about this. When it comes to school, this is a great way to test yourself on your motivator. When it comes to school, the highly intellectual person does what?
Studies.
Yeah, does homework, studies and kind of gets jazzed about studying. They might actually know where the library is. Whereas the instinctive person is always why am I waiting until the very last second to do my homework? Why do I put myself under this amount of stress? Why did I wait and cram for the exam? I pulled an all-nighter. Seriously, when it came to school, I was much more on that side.
Yeah.
My roommate Stacy and I were both on that side, and we would stay up literally all night before a law school exam, cram it all in, and then show up and just, regurgitate it, right?
Yeah.
And we did well. And it would drive the intellectuals crazy because they had been studying day after day after day after day. And maybe we'd get the same grade. In some cases, maybe we did even a little better, right?
Right.
So it's not about smarts. It's about how you value knowledge. So hopefully you've related at some level, and maybe sometimes you feel like you're on one side and sometimes you're on the other. That means you're probably more in the middle, and it really just depends on the situation. But those of you who can relate to the extremes of being intellectual and getting in, diving in, researching everything and then some, you're an intellectual. And those who are on the instinctive side, who are just kind of like, let me Google it and see what we've got and let's just get going and we'll go from there, you're probably more instinctive.
Yeah, so the big takeaway that we would like you to gather from this is that even though we have two different continuums, two different spectrums of knowledge, people who like to gather knowledge in the intellectual part, so data gatherers, you do have the instinctive side. Both sides, there's nothing wrong with either side of them.
There's no right or wrong.
And there is no right or wrong. And
there are people right now going, you're crazy. Of course there's a right and wrong.
But if really the big takeaway is can you identify those people? And if you're in a managerial role or a leadership role and you are highly intellectual or you're highly instinctive, identify who the people that report to you. Are they intellectual? Are they instinctive? So start looking for that. And then you can start treating them and either leading them, or you can start being led, depending on if you're a direct report, on how you want to be motivated. And a lot of times just sitting down and having that conversation, say, I need this information or I don't need it. And it can make things a lot easier and a lot less conflict.
Yeah, and I think the reason that Paul and I bring this to you, of course, every podcast that we do, every Evolve to Win show that we do for the purpose of hopefully sharing information with you that will help you grow in your awareness of yourself or your awareness of others. Because we know that the most successful people in life and in business are those who are really, really in tune with themselves and self-aware. So it'd be interesting to hear from you whether you fall more on the intellectual side of the spectrum or more on the instinctive side, and what do you do with it, right? So it's all about adaptation and making sure you meet people where they are. And if we can help you release some of that judgment, if you happen to be on one side or the other, that's always a good thing, because then work is a lot easier and a lot more fun.
And thank you for joining us for another Evolve to Win show. We hope you enjoyed this. We will have part 3 next week.
Yeah, and part 3, what are we doing? What's the next one? What's the next one on the...
Don't worry, we'll post it.
We'll let you know, because I'm on the instinctive side of things. It's going to be just in time. It's right there. What is it?
Let's see.
Let's do, the next one we're going to do is on methodologies. So we're going to talk about rules and system and structure and procedure for next week. If you haven't connected with us yet, please go to heatherchristie.com, sign up for our leadership list. Hope to see you soon.